Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me again today, and I am very excited to have as my guest Omar Halabi. Omar, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Meredith. Great to be here.
Well, I'm so excited because you had one line in your LinkedIn profile that immediately caught my attention, and I want to share it with my audience. It's this: I have a deep passion for helping people unleash their leadership potential through mentorship and career coaching. And for my listeners, these words match so beautifully one of the purposes of my podcast, which is to feature leaders who are committed to helping others become the best version of themselves. And in speaking with Omar earlier, there's so much, Omar, that you're doing that I'm excited to share with my audience. Before we jump in, let me tell them a little bit about you. Omar is Director of Technology at Amazon Payment Services, and in this role, he's responsible for delivering simple, trusted, and affordable payment solutions for customers and merchants across the Middle East and North Africa. He's based in Dubai, and he has been in this role since 2019. Prior to this, Omar led technology teams within Amazon's Supply Chain Optimization Technologies organization based in Seattle for 4 years. Overall, he has 20 plus years of technology experience where he has delivered transformational initiatives that have created competitive advantage, enabled business growth, exceeded customer expectations, and transformed global organizations. And Omar, I know you haven't accomplished this alone. That's the beauty of the work that you're doing. And so I'd love to start out having you just talk a little bit about your journey into the various leadership roles that you've had over the years.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Meredith, for the intro. Absolutely. I think a lot of what shaped sort of obviously my journey itself, and then my philosophy and approach to leadership, has definitely not been without tremendous support from managers, leaders, co-workers, and mentors that have shaped my trajectory through that. And if I were to trace back, in my career, I started out, I finished my undergraduate degree in computer science, then went on for a master's, and immediately after that started in the industry, working the ranks in terms of starting as a technology analyst or developer, and then working my way up through managers. And if I have to sort of pinpoint at every inflection point throughout my career, whether it was about having a challenging but necessary conversation with my manager about my career aspiration and growth, or whether it was about making a decision to take on an opportunity, and sometimes it meant traveling halfway around the world to get global opportunity or exposure, etc. I can trace and recall very vividly conversations that I've had with mentors, 10, 15 years ago, and how they helped me think through these situations. Ultimately, we all have to make our own decisions and take the actions that are necessary. But I think essentially leveraging the experience that comes from mentors who've been there and done that tremendously helps. And a lot of what I do now is, in a way, I look at it as giving back. And a lot of the opportunities I was very fortunate and privileged to have throughout my career in helping others make some of these decisions. Because one of the things, at least I fundamentally believe in, is like, if you look at any of the, let's say, major life decisions that you make, or any significant decisions that you make, typically you consult with people, whether it's your family, it's your friends, and others. But I find oftentimes, like, when we look at our careers, we're either maybe hesitant to ask or don't know actually that this is something we can go and talk to folks about. And I feel it's tremendous opportunity that's under leveraged in terms of how do you leverage other experience, because you're going to go through these situations for the first time a lot of the times, and there's no playbook you can go read and tells you what to do. So I hope that sort of sheds some light, but I feel like this experience going through it on myself and how I help others through it, I think was very much shaped by my own journey as I went along. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. And it caused me to think about you do so much these days to me where you are being proactive and reaching out to help others beyond the team that you work with, right? So talk a little bit about some of the things, because I think what you're doing are some things that some of my listeners would enjoy doing, but they may not have thought about it before. How are you reaching out and helping to mentor and coach others?
Sure. So it all started with essentially, obviously, I do a lot of that as part of my day-to-day role within Amazon, and it's been on my mind actually for a while prior to me kind of becoming more active in the last maybe 7 or 8 months in that journey. Is thinking about how do I continue to scale my impact and benefit others essentially from what I learned. And obviously, social media platforms, particularly in this case, LinkedIn, I think gives a great platform to do that. And so for me, I just wanted to make sure that I have a way to scale my impact. But what I quickly discovered along the way, though, is that as I started to share a lot of what I learned on LinkedIn, it's actually how much I'm learning from that experience through the interactions that I have as others engage with my content and provide their own perspectives on many of these topics. So while initially my intent was primarily more of a one-way push of, let's say, information, knowledge, wisdom, etc., what I found, it's very much a two-way street in that respect, more so than I probably ever imagined having started to do that. Obviously, it takes effort and work, but I look at it as part of my development journey as well, both in terms of learning and what I love about what I'm able to do in terms of, given my, let's say, day job that I have, and then the engagements I'm having with the external audiences, how much of those learnings I can then take back, apply, see how it works in kind of the real world, and then inform, my opinions, my guidance, etc. So it's kind of created like almost like a feedback loop of cycle of self-development and growth. And I hope that in this journey of growing myself, I'm helping others grow as well, both within the organization as well as outside of it. And it's surprisingly enough, like, again, while I started a lot of this sort of external engagement, I have tons of followers from within the company, and even within the company, obviously it's a very large company spread across the globe. And even internally, while you network internally and you build connections and whatever else, like this just takes it to a whole other level where I have colleagues from different parts of the world, different businesses who engage with me that otherwise, to be honest, even internally, that connection wouldn't necessarily have happened as it was. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, as you were talking, I got to thinking so often the teacher becomes the student, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
As you are sharing and people are giving thoughtful replies, it speaks so much about the quality of the content you're putting out there, that people want to engage with it and with you and give you information then that you can bring to your own work. I'd love for you to share a couple of examples, if you can think of them off the top of your head, where someone has responded to something that you wrote and you found a way to apply that with people on your team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that on any particular topic, for example, I remember I had one video episode of one of my shows called Leadership in 60 Seconds, where the episode was about mentorship, and I was presenting an approach in terms of one way that I provoke thinking in a mentorship session. And then I asked the audience, like, hey, what tips have you found helpful in terms of either as a mentee or a mentor in terms of how to engage in a fruitful conversation? And I had a whole list of responses from folks, and several of these questions, like I remember one member of the audience was talking about like how they used what we call scaling questions. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you, for example, rate your ability in a specific area or with a specific skill, whether soft or functional, and then, help steer the conversation direction of like, if you had to move or improve your score by, let's say, 1 point or so, what would that look like? What would you do, and what actions would you take? So this was just one example. There's a whole list of suggestions that the audience came up with, and again, very much like take some of these, test them out, see what works, see what doesn't work. And the thing with, I think, especially in the area that I work in within leadership, there's no right or wrong answer. And of course, there's a whole set of diverse people that we interact with. There's nothing that just works with everyone. And so the more toolkits that you're able to incorporate into your approach, I think the more effective you are, whether as a mentor or as a coach. And I think that this kind of crowdsourcing, I think really helps. Yeah.
That's a great example. I'm curious what distinction you make between mentoring and coaching when you think
Sure.
about, I've got on my mentor hat versus my coach hat. How do those look different?
Sure. Definitely. And first, I'll acknowledge, like, in some sense, there's no hard and fast separation, at least in my mind. And while I look at it as more of a spectrum, if you will, because at times we mentor a little bit and we coach a little bit. But then, of course, there are coaching specialists, which I by no means claim to be. And then there are mentors. The way I look at it is, in a simplified manner, as a mentor is somebody that primarily talks to you about their experience, and through their journey and their experience, helps you figure out that, hey, in any given situation or something, a challenge that you're facing, how you could potentially approach it based on what your mentor has experienced. So it's a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more hands-off in that respect in terms of providing guidance, but it's more for the mentee to kind of absorb, incorporate, and figure out how do you move forward with that information. I would say for me, coaching is a little bit more hands-on in terms of supporting the coachee through their understanding or ability in a certain topic, and helping them move from point A to point B actively. Not to say that the coachee obviously doesn't have to do their own part of the work, etc., but it's a lot more sort of hands-on. And I feel, at least for me, like mentorship without any semblance of coaching, while it's helpful, may not be super effective, because there may be a gap to where if you just leave it at that, while the person may take the guidance, they may find it difficult to figure out, like, what do I actually do with it, and how to actually apply it, and how to get better, for example, in a certain area that I'm struggling in. So I find myself doing a little bit of both in that respect. But I also very much respect that each one of these is a discipline on of its own. And obviously coaching also has a very formalized and structured techniques that certified coaches have, etc., that work well in scenarios that they're approaching as well. But that's, at least to me, how I think about it. So I put myself as a mentor first, and maybe a coach second. But yeah.
That makes so much sense to me. Yeah, I always think of a mentor as more directive, guiding, because based on your own experience, where the coaching element is drawing out of the other person some wisdom, insights that they may not even realize they have, helping them learn through asking good questions. And it sounds like you're so good at that. I'm curious, you mentioned Amazon. Of course, all of us know Amazon, probably have bought lots of things from Amazon, and it is a huge organization. So I'd be interested in hearing, what are some of the things that you do to help people feel valued, so they don't just feel like a number or just one of hundreds of thousands?
Absolutely. It's a great question, and something that's always on the top of my mind, because for people to be engaged in the work that they're doing, they have to feel that both the work that they're doing matters, and that obviously, it's something that's helping them as well. So a couple of things that at least have helped me, lead teams in that respect. I think first and foremost is bringing that connection to customers. I think when everybody in the organization or the team really understand how is it that their work is impacting customers, I think definitely makes at least them appreciate more the work that they're doing. Now, in some cases, this is easier. For example, if you're working in a function that's directly customer facing, so you may think of somebody like in a call center that's answering phone calls literally every day, and talking to customers is basically their day job. But then you have functions that are, let's say, further removed from direct interaction. But I think finding ways to make that connection happen is very important. And so, for example, as part of my teams, we go and listen on calls that relate to the areas that we work in to understand what are customers saying about, say, in this case, for me, it's the payment experience that they see online. How well does it work for them? What are some of the, suggestions or issues that they're having, etc. I think the moment the teams see how that reflects to the customer, I think brings a whole other level of engagement. A lot of the times, our team members are also customers in that respect as well. Mm-hmm. And that also helps because they're able to see. One example I'd like to give is a big part of my team isn't co-located physically with me here. But for example, the other day I was driving on the highway and I noticed there was a big banner and there was a feature of a payment product that we worked in within Amazon. And so, of course, found a place to stop the car and went down, took some pictures and sent it to the team. I think sometimes these small things make a difference for people to feel like, hey, what we're doing is making a difference in the customer's life. That's kind of one thing. I would say the other thing to me is also making sure that as leaders, we're constantly aligning and sort of illuminating the relationship between the work the team is doing and obviously how it's serving the organization and its customers, mm-hmm. but also how it's helping the individuals in terms of their personal and personal development and career growth as well. And obviously, the more direct that relationship is in the minds of the team, the more they're engaged in the work because they see the value that it's also bringing to them, aside from obviously that it's bringing to the organization there. That was maybe point number 2. And then, of course, like the third one is you have to take care of all the basic hygiene, whether it's in terms of recognition that you're doing for the team, whether in terms of obviously things like compensation, benefits. So all these things also obviously play a role. But to me, probably these 2 things I found to have the most impact in that regards.
Those are great responses. And, really, no matter what size an organization is, what you've just described is really critical. People need to understand how what they do impacts the customers who are using their product or service, but also seeing the relevance of what they do, tying in with the larger organization and themselves. And this is something that is stressed so much with younger workers these days. They want to see that, what they're doing has a purpose and really serves. One of the things I'm curious about, do you devote time specifically to getting to know your employees individually, what's important to them? And if so, how does that impact the relationship you're able to build with them?
Yeah, definitely. I think building relationships with the team is definitely essentially a key enabler for us to work effectively together, to understand their perspective, to be able to, in some sense, see the world from their lens as well. And as you think about whether it's opportunities or ways that you interact with them, I think it helps you be a more effective leader. Obviously, in a way, like you prioritize based on the folks that you interact with the most. So for me, it's like knowing at least my directs at that deep level is super important. Obviously, as the organization scales, I'd really like to know everyone in the org so well. it becomes not feasible at some point. So you try to do as much of that as you can, especially like second level leader, third level leaders, etc. And obviously we have things like, team buildings and interactions with our skip level meetings or others that help us get closer to team members. But definitely the more you're able to know your team members, the more you're able to work effectively together and help challenge them in a way that allows them to grow as well.
Mm-hmm. Just knowing your focus on people and the values you have about them. Sometimes communication skills are referred to as soft skills, but I have a feeling that for you, they're not soft skills. They're really critical, important skills. And so talk a little bit about which of the communication skills have you found to be most important in your interactions with all the various levels of your team?
Sure. So yeah, definitely. I would say like communication is definitely at the top of the agenda, as they say. And I think that the higher essentially you go up in the organization, your ability to communicate both upwards, obviously sideways, and then to the team as well, is not even like something optional or nice to have. It's a must have to be effective and successful. I think the couple of realities that we all find ourselves in is essentially that obviously people are getting inundated with information and messages and communications from all directions. And as with all of us that are super busy, also attention spans also are getting shorter and shorter. At least I feel that way for myself. And so as we think about communication, particularly, like I think it's important to take these things into account and figure out that how do we create compelling, effective communication with the team. And here, particularly, I'm talking about communications, not necessarily more of the formal ones like reports or written documents or whatnot, but messages to the team, whether it's about culture and how we do things or around employee engagement or otherwise. I think being very clear about how do we deliver the messages in a simple, replicatable way as well, because you may have a meeting and it may be inconvenient for some location. Some location may be off, or some people may be busy in something else or dealing with an emergency. So I think how do you develop communication that's simple and effective and you're able to scale it becomes very important to make sure that the team is in some ways marching in the same direction. Again, whether it's about the vision in terms of where we're trying to go, but also how we do things and what we value. So those are areas where I feel like communication becomes very important, and communicating at scale in terms of how do you simplify the message, how do you reinforce it, how do you distribute it, both in terms of whether in writing, in audio, or in video, because we also understand that different audiences respond differently based on the medium that the information is communicated in.
Well, thinking about specific communication skills, my personal feeling is listening is such a critical skill for leaders to have.
Yeah.
And so I would love for you to just share a little bit about what you've learned around listening to people. Why is that so important to you? And in particular, listening with empathy, and maybe give examples of where you've done that with anyone on your team and had something positive come as a result of it.
Oh, definitely. So I think listening, again, it's one of those things similar to when we talk about more broadly about communication, becomes very important. And especially, I feel like for me, listening is a way to stay also connected to the detail and connected to the front line and the team, because obviously I'm not there all the time. And so listening is a way for me to understand what's happening in the broader organization, learn about different perspectives, understand the challenges, understand the opportunities. And so I found myself like listening more as I sort of moved on in my journey, versus talking more, which you would think maybe it's the other way around. But for me, I think when we talk about listening with empathy, I think a few things that come up for me. I think it's really like showcasing like curiosity and being clear with really leading with intent. That your intent is really to understand the challenge that the team members is bringing. It's easy to get, especially in our hyper-connected world, like distracted. But how do you be like fully present with that person? You know, maintaining eye contact, listening to non-verbal cues. You know, reading body language. You know, weighing in and saying like, hey, maybe this may be I know this may be a difficult topic for you to bring up, because maybe they're telling you about something and they could be worried that, hey, if my manager knows perhaps that this is a conversation I'm having, maybe it puts them in an uncomfortable situation. So just giving them assurance that, hey, you can talk to me about anything you talk about with me here, at least in that context, is confidential, etc. I think just shows that you're genuinely interested in what they're doing. I think, and then in particular, you know, taking away some actions from the discussion that you're having, I think is also important. And that, like, while you may have listened in that meeting and done a good job, ultimately, if the employees also don't feel that you've actually internalized what they've said and taken some actions based on that, the trust doesn't really build there in those cases. So how do you make sure that if you've taken some actions, if you promised some follow-ups, whatever it may be, and these could be very small things, that you follow through with it, because that also shows that not only have you actually listened to them, but you understood what they meant, and they've taken it forward there. And then maybe the last sort of tip or example that I can think through is also that as you listen, I was like the saying, you know, really listen to understand rather than to respond. Because the moment that somebody's speaking, we tend to immediately start thinking about, okay, well, how do I respond?
Yes.
But really, how do you pull yourself back and say, like, let me just listen and not worry about what I have to respond. I can always pause, take a minute, put my thoughts together, but really listen to what they have and consider their ideas. Whether or not we end up moving forward with those ideas is like a different matter. But at least we made sure we understand the point of view and we've considered it with all the right parameters, if you will. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, those are such excellent examples, Omar, because it goes back to showing people you value them. When you not just hear what they're saying, but then actually take action based on that. And you mentioned a key word, trust, that I think is so vital in a relationship between leaders and the members of their teams, because it takes a while to build that, and yet it can go away quickly if you don't walk your talk, if you don't do what you say you would do. So I think those are such great examples of how to demonstrate to people their importance. And I think that's at the core of helping people feel valued, building that engagement and commitment to the team, to the organization. So I think that's great. One of the things everyone is challenged with these days is time, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes struggling to prioritize. What are some of the things that you've done to help members of your team, you know, be able to prioritize, focus their time, and still balance work and their personal lives?
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a topic of almost every mentorship conversation in some way, shape, or form. I think for me, maybe the first thing that I would start with, and this is something that I found out partway through my career, to be honest, the hard way in terms of, mental model of how to think about that, is I'd like to sort of move the thinking from traditional productivity, where we always think about it in terms of how do you do something, let's say the same thing with less time, and how do you do more? To me, maybe pivoting that more towards like thinking about it in terms of effectiveness rather than necessarily productivity, particularly when it comes to what I call like achieving outcomes. So I always have a famous saying is like, drive outcomes over outputs. And what I meant by that is be mindful and be very explicit about what's the impact that you're delivering basis the things that you're working on to guide where you should spend your time, as opposed to just treating everything like a long to-do list and then just kind of working through it. Not that I have anything against to-do lists. I have to-do lists myself, but I think focusing on the outcomes that you're enabling and making sure that you're spending your time on the outcomes that matter the most, whether these are formal goals that you've taken up within the organization or even personal goals that you have to drive. So for me, it's less about like, how do I do more, but more a focus on how do I make sure that I'm spending my time on the right things. And while that may sound like pretty trivial, like one of the litmus tests that I use myself to make sure that I'm keeping myself in check, but I also encourage my team to use, is I tell them, go and audit your calendar for the last, whatever, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and just check like how much time are you spending versus what your priorities are. And you'd be amazed at the findings in terms of like, hey, we think we're working on our priorities, but when you actually audit your time, you'll find that your calendar tells a completely different story. And again, there will always be things that you'll have to tackle here and there. That maybe it's something urgent or something's come up. But I think we want to make sure that we're being very intentional about how we're spending our time and making sure we're focused on the right things in terms of the right priorities. And when we do that, I think shifting the feeling from like, I need to knock off everything that's on my to-do list for me to feel, let's say, satisfied, happy, or say that I'm finished for the day, to say that, hey, what are the 2 or 3 critical priorities that I'm judging my performance on, that I would say for me, as long as I got those done today, tomorrow is another day. I'll come in the office, I'll open my inbox and start working my way there. So I felt, to me, this mental shift is probably the one thing that has made the most impact for me. And obviously in practice, it needs constant vigilance. And so it's easy for us to fall back on old habits, but something that I actually strive on doing. Yeah.
I like that. The focus on achieving outcomes suggests to me a different question, but related, and that is, some managers, their people complain about them because they try to micromanage too much. They're too involved in the weeds and the how-tos. But it sounds like to me you're wanting to give your people the leeway to create the hows. Am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely.
How do you help them with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think once I spend a lot of my times, working with the team to help define the outcomes and what that looks like, because I think the more clarity there is there, then you can basically say like, hey, it's up to you to figure out what's the best way to deliver or achieve that outcome. And a lot of times they may do it in a different way than you had envisioned. You may have your own opinions, whether that way is better or worse or whatever else. But ultimately, what matters is, have we achieved the intended outcome, and what did that person learn along the way? So I think the moment that you can be very clear about the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, that's what also helps you scale as a leader, because you can't go in, and even if you were to micromanage, it's like, how many people can you micromanage? 5, 10, 15? Like at some point, it just doesn't work. And so the only way to be able to, provide people the independence, yet make sure that we're all marching towards achieving the intended goals for the organization and for the customers, is to essentially be very explicit about the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve for the things that matter. And obviously every leader at every level, they also have specific outcomes that they define for their own teams, but at least the ones that are, very impactful to the broader organization, these we need to spend a good amount of time defining really well, so that then we can basically unleash our teams to go chase after them. Yeah.
And so, in this whole work-life balance, what are some of the messages in one way or another that you convey to your team so they don't feel like they've got to work long hours or check emails, after hours, or some of the things that cause
Sure.
people to get burned out because of the number of hours they feel they're having to put in?
No, absolutely. So there's a few things that at least Meredith that I do. I think one of them, particularly related to emails and after hours, like one thing I'm very explicit with my team, whether the direct team or the extended organization on, is that, hey, while we can't control what time people send emails or messages or whatever else, and I'm guilty of that myself. Like last night, I was taking a walk and an idea just hit me, so I just sent a message to one of my directs. My expectation is that, hey, if it's urgent, meaning it has to be done in a synchronous way, and now we will use established mechanisms of like paging or calling somebody. Outside of that, no matter what email you receive or whatever messages you may get, etc., there's absolutely no expectation that you would respond to them there. And I make it a point, like if somebody responds, I respond back like, "Hey, what are you doing, working now or whatever?" But that's another story. But that's maybe one thing on the smaller side. I think to me the rest is like leading by example in terms of
Yeah.
modeling that behavior, taking time off, whatever else. I think is super important. If your team is seeing that you're spending that much time and effort, not taking vacations, whatever else, you just send the wrong signal to the organization, even if you're intending well. There is probably another one, and then the third one is like in terms of how we basically praise or encourage. I think for me, one of the things that I've been more cognizant about is what we decide to celebrate as an organization. I find that a lot of times we have to be mindful there as well, because while at times, yes, we may have to in the last minute kind of scramble and do some heroics to get something across the finish line, but I'm always mindful that, hey, sustained effort, like sustained effort beyond what's normal over a long period of time is not healthy, nor is it sustainable. So how do we make sure that we intervene in these cases and identify like what's going on, what do we need to adjust, etc., as opposed to just in some ways leave it be. So those are all ways and means that we manage that. Obviously, again, it's always a work in progress in
Yes.
that respect. Yeah.
I I think that this whole thing of the leader modeling what
Yeah.
is, because you can say things, but if you're not living them, you're
Yeah.
really sending mixed messages. Omar, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. Is there anything else that you can think of that you would like to share with my listeners that you've learned as a leader that you think might be beneficial to them?
Yeah. I think thanks, Meredith. Very much enjoyed the conversation. I think maybe in terms of taking sort of one maybe key takeaway here is, especially when it comes to leadership development and career development in general, I think I encourage the audience to utilize a lot of the social platforms that we have at our disposal. I know we tend to think of them more maybe from a personal perspective, or even from a professional perspective. We tend to think of them more as like, this is a tool that perhaps helps me get a job or get my next opportunity. But I think if we use them as means to essentially develop ourselves, I think there's a lot of good content out there, and I encourage everyone to also put in what they're learning, what they're contributing. I think at times we hesitate, like with maybe a little bit of imposter syndromes, like, do I have something to add, etc. Like put it out there and see how the community sort of interacts and develops around that. I think if we all do that, I think we'll all grow together and learn together. So that would be kind of uh, my advice is like leverage these platforms to increase or accelerate your growth, and then also contribute back. And I think if we all do that, then we'll create a vibrant ecosystem of professional development, across the globe. So I'm super excited and passionate about that, and I hope others join me on the journey as well. Yeah.
Oh, that is a fabulous way to close out. Thank you for sharing it and or kind of presenting that challenge, because I think it is so critical. And you exemplify that with the way you've posted, and then you've said how much you learn from people who respond. So it really is such a great learning experience, both sides. Well, let people know how they can connect with you, Omar, and
Sure.
learn about this wonderful content that you're creating and sharing.
Absolutely. I think the best way is please reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a connection request, and I'm happy to engage with the audience and help them in any way that I can. I do post daily on leadership development and career growth. I also recently, actually, this past week, launched my first ebook. So I'm very excited about that as well. But there are tons of resources on my profile on my website that I share with the community. So happy to connect and engage and learn together, as we said. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And we'll be sure, of course, to have your links in our show notes page for your episode, so people will be able to find it there. Omar, thank you for being such a remarkable leader and human being. I'm so glad to have had a chance to bring you and your experiences and wisdom to my audience today. I really appreciate you. So thanks so much.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Meredith, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here and talking to you and the audience as well. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.